how do we counter that about the crisis amongst boys, the anti-male sentiment that we hear so much about in popular culture, toxic masculinity, male privilege, all these sort of negative messages? How do we counter that? What would be your message to mothers and young boys?
Part of what you do is you counter that in the home first, to the degree that a mother might be motivated by a resentful quasi-feminist ethos. That's going to manifest itself in her son's life. It's like, well, I'm antagonistic to the patriarchy. Okay, so what do you mean by that? The patriarchy, is that a manifestation of the central spirit of masculinity? Or what is it? Because if it's not that, then what is it? Well, let's say it's that. Well, your son's masculine, so how do you think your attitude towards masculinity is going to work for him? You're going to treat him like he's a baby patriarchal oppressor, or that his ambition is part of the force that rapes and pillages the planet, and that idea is sort of lurking at the basis of all your interactions with him? You think that's going to go well? That's the devouring mother from the Freudian perspective. That's not going to go well. And so it's good to remember, if you're a mother, when you talk about the patriarchy, you're talking about your son.
But even in boys' schools, even in education centres that are supposed to be devoted to good outcomes for boys, there is just so much unrelenting messaging about toxic masculinity and male privilege. I just wonder, what impact does that have on young men growing up?
Well, we know what impact it has on them. They just drop out. Why wouldn't they? Because, so imagine they're actually ethical, their boys are ethical in their fundamental orientation. So then they hear that their desire to engage in rough and tumble play, their desire to point and shoot at things, for example, which is deeply masculine, deeply human for that matter, because we point and shoot and aim at things. That's our entire physiological platform. We're hunting creatures, and that all. So your ambition is nothing but a manifestation of the corrupt and oppressive patriarchy. And as I said, you're part of the force that destroys the planet. If you have a shred of ethical sense and you're a young man, that's just going to stop you. It's going to just demotivate you. And in some sense, that's the purpose, because women who are afraid of men confuse competence with power, and then they believe that the road to peace is the antagonism to power, and because they don't discriminate between power and competence, they become antagonistic to their son's competence, and then, well, and then they reap exactly what they sow. They end up with incompetent boys. Well, what went wrong? It's like, well, how about you discouraged every sign of competence, every chance you had? I read this account a while back, a woman author in the United States, whose name I don't remember, talked about just how difficult it was to stop her son from playing with guns. She said, well, I took every gun out of the house, or even anything that remotely looked like a gun, and that boy, you know, he'd take the toothbrush and shoot the cat with it. And how appalling is that? It's like, oh, you're quite the monster, aren't you? You saw something manifest in your son that was so deep, this desire to point and shoot, let's say, that despite your best efforts, you couldn't crush it. And then you didn't even notice that you were spending all that time trying to crush it, and it was so deep that you couldn't, and you still regarded what you were doing as a virtue. It's like, boy, your son, he certainly needs a new mother, that's for sure. So
I worry though also about girls, because academically they're doing much better from preschool all the way to university.
Do a little rough on the mental health front.
Exactly, on the mental health front. And I wonder, being told you're a victim, that you're oppressed, even though if you live in the West, what does that do to the female psyche of a young woman growing up? Thinking
It definitely increases the degree to which young women are anxious and depressed, because it makes them self-conscious.